And I hope you'll fill out the surveys that we have in the back for you. Tonight's program with Mark Doty is sponsored by the RCAH Center for Poetry and by the Office of Inclusion and Intercultural Initiatives. After the reading, we will be having a reception upstairs in the Lookout Gallery with delicious things to eat. So I hope you will come and do that. We have a lot of flyers on the back table. This is our last program. And one of the things I want to do, since this is the final program of the year, April, National Poetry Month has been wonderful. Those of you who have participated know how wonderful it's been. But I want the Poetry Center staff to come down and be recognized for all of the hard work that they've done during you see their faces all the time. We would not have, this is the logistics team. These are the folks who make it happen. And as you can see, one of them right here makes the photographs happen. But Sarah Teffen is not with us tonight, which is a great tragedy since she is our letterpress printer. And she's a senior who's graduating. But Lori Hollinger, who's the assistant director of the Center for Poetry. Stark, who does many of the pictures you see and a lot of the media stuff. Then we have Arzelia Williams and Grace Karras, who are our spoken word poets, who got Cupsy going and all of that. Erin Lammers, who is a senior who's graduating, and Sydney Meadowcroft, who is also graduating. So we need to thank you all for everything you do. Especially chopping vegetables and putting out. I don't think I mentioned that we will be selling books. Everybody Reads, the wonderful little independent bookstore down on Michigan Avenue, will be selling books after the reading, and Mark is kind enough to do some signing. So I think that's all the announcements. Again, I want to thank you all for the support all season, all year of the Poetry Center, and we have some very good things lined up for next year. Next year is our 10th anniversary. Can you believe it? Wow. 10 years, 2007. So look for some special things around the Poetry Center, but also some special things in the college, because we'll have a memorable year. So as we close, in the first paragraph of Mark Doty's book, The Art of Description, he writes, "It sounds like a simple thing to say what you see, but try to find the words for the shades of mottled sassafras leaf, or the reflectivity of a bay on an August morning, or the very beginning of desire stirring in the gaze of someone looking right into your eyes. And it immediately becomes clear that all we see is slippery, nuanced, elusive. As Susan Mitchell says, the world is wily and doesn't want to be caught." All that being true, Mark Doty is a master at putting world into word, as some of you know from attending his talk this afternoon or from reading his work. It is unwise to read Mark Doty's work without a highlighter in hand, or perhaps two, as the first may run out of its yellow before you reach the middle of the book. Let me just give you some of my favorite highlights. Here's one. "Isn't everything so shadowed by its own brevity, we can hardly tell the thing from its elegy?" Or, "What can words do but link what we know to what we don't, and so form a shape?" Or, "Longing, of course, becomes its own object, the way that desire can make anything into a god." Or, finally, "Here and gone, that's what it is to be human, I think, to be both someone and no one at once, to hold a particular identity in the world, our names, our place of origin, our family and affectional ties, and to feel that solid set of ties also capable of dissolution, slipping away as we become moments of attention." There is so much to remember, so much to treasure in the way Mark Doty gives us the ordinary in remarkable ways. As one of the students in my poetry workshop this semester remarked after reading his collection of new and selected poems, Fire to Fire, he puts words and ideas together that you would never expect to find in the same sentence. Another student added, I know he's speaking to me. Language and connection. Human to human, past to present, earth to heaven, life to death, love to loss, and let's not forget, human to animal, and vice versa. That's what Mark Doty is all about. The author of 16 books of poetry and nonfiction, and the recipient of numerous grants and fellowships, Mark Doty has won, among many prestigious accolades, the Waiting Writers Award, the T.S. Eliot Prize, the National Poetry Series, the Los Angeles Times Book Award, the National Book Critics Circle Award, the PEN Martha Albrand Award for First Nonfiction, and the National Book Award for Fire to Fire, New and Selected Poems. A longtime resident of Provincetown, Massachusetts, Doty teaches creative writing at Rutgers University in New York. Critic Joel Brower in The Progressive stated that in Mark Doty, quote, "We see an already masterful poet refusing to lapse into nostalgia or to unthinkingly reuse the poetic strategies that have served him so well in the past. Instead, we find Mark Doty exploring new territories and questioning himself at every turn." Ruth Padel described Doty as, and I love this, a poet of glow in her review in the New York Times, admitting that Doty's work has always celebrated surfaces and lyric glitter. Padel maintained that the surface glow does not merely delight us, but also leads us deeper in to insight. The important variety in Doty is not rhythm or vocabulary, but situation. All that iridescence is there to tell us something about being human. Tonight, we welcome Mark Doty to the RCAH Center for Poetry. He was gracious enough to serve as the judge for this year's Annie Balocating Prize for Poetry, and before sharing his work with us, he'll announce the winner of the 2017 competition. Please welcome Mark Doty.
Thank you. I'm going to say, if you ever need somebody to sum you up in a way you really like, it was a real, well, first of all, I also want to thank, it's been a wonderful welcome from the Poetry Center and everybody here. I'm quite delighted to be here at MSU. And I was also delighted before I got here to read the entries for the Balocating Prize. There were marvelous things. How many of you entered the contest right here? These are great, wonderful. There were wonderful things in each of these poems. There were really things to admire all throughout. I had to pick a winner. And there was one poem that I found myself, I just kept coming back to because of its wit and its charm and the way that it very carefully shaped an experience for the reader, and also the way that underneath that wit and charm was just a little bit of a barb. And there's something very nice about humor combined with a little anger, a little well-placed anger. So the winner of this year's prize, I am happy to announce, is Emma Hintzen for her prize for Life. So, where's that? Do you have the white apple? Where do I have the white apple? Here we are. The white apple is underneath. Here you go. So congratulations, Emma, and let's hear it.
Thank you. Okay. Oh my gosh. Other stuff in here too. Oh, cool. Okay. The wife of a sommelier leaves her husband. I think you know why I'm leaving. I call you an alcoholic, but I'm well aware that it isn't about drinking, since you spit most of it out into the little silver buckets that litter every surface of the house. Besides, no barstool bum has the same dedication to his jack as you do to your Napa Valley Reds. It's partly my fault. I was the one who wanted to register for the decanter, and it was me who bought the aerator that you asked for your 33rd birthday. I didn't mind at first. I thought it would be nice if when we went out, at least one of us could make sense of the wine list, but that's all. I didn't know that this harmless hobby would evolve into classes and flashcards and certifications, new somm friends and a new somm job, late somm nights and tipsy somm weekends. You're swishing and spitting and swishing again while I sit alone on our couch. How could I foresee your blind tasting despair when you call it Rhine Valley but turns out it's Bordeaux? How could I know you'd build a sturdy somm wall of green glass bricks and grape-stained mortar? I just can't stay here knowing I don't measure up to the pure wooden crates of long-necked bottles, full-bodied mistresses you keep at exactly 55 degrees. You call them lively, vivacious, velvety, elegant. You breathe them in, furrow your brow, whirl them around. You sip and smile absorbed. I ache for a fraction of the focus you award to them. Ask me why I've turned cloudy. Let's argue about my tannin thoughts and my acidic looks you ignore. Tell me that I faded from the star-bright woman you married. Call me nutty, oaky, smoky, call me pruny, tinny, tired, call me anything. I'm not from an exotic, climatically ideal region in southern France, but even now I'd follow you there if it meant you'd look at me just once with half the happiness you normally reserve for Alsatian Riesling. But we both know you won't, so I'm going to go. I'll put it in terms that you'll understand. You and me, vintage 2012, immensely inviting at first with aromas of fresh violets, worn leather, new carpet. Starts sweet but slowly darkens with tones of cold chicken, dusty suitcase, fading pine sol. Bitter and dry at the finish.
The way that the woman becomes jealous of those adjectives. Velvety, fruity. Why can't you call me those things? It's a wonderful poem, and very well read, too.
Thank you.
So I'm going to attempt to follow that by reading you a mix of some new work and some older things, too. I'm going to start out with a couple of new poems. And this first one began, a friend of mine has a line in one of his poems. He says, marriage is a pact with the memory of another, which I think is true. But it's also true that marriage is a pact with the pets of another. When you start a new relationship, you have to get to know and hopefully like the kind of animal that you're partner with. So after many, many years of living with big dogs, I find myself with my first terrier. It's an alien encounter. This is called Little George. Little George barks at whatever is not the world as he prefers to know it. Trash sacks, hand trucks, black cats, canes and hoods, bicycles, snow shovels, someone smoking a joint beneath the overhang of the Haitian evangelicals. Anyone, how dare they, walking a dog. George barks, the tense white comma of himself arced in alarm. Home floats in the creaturely domestic, curled in the triangle behind a sleeper's knees, wiggling on his back on the sofa, all jelly and sighs, receiving a belly rub. No worries. But outside the apartment's metal door, the unmanageable day assumes its blurred and infinite disguises. Best to bark. No matter that he's slightly larger than a toaster. He proceeds as if he rules a rectangle 2 blocks deep, bounded west and east by 7th Avenue and Union Square. Whatever's there is there by his consent. He's subject to the rebuke of his refusal, but when he asserts his will, he trembles. If only he were not solely responsible for raising outcry at any ripple of trouble on West 16th, or if, right out on the pavement, he might lay down the clanking armor of his bluster. Some evening, when he's climbed the stairs after our late walk, and rounds the landing's turn and turns his way towards his steady sleep, I wish he might be visited by a dream of the world as kind. How any looming unreadable might turn out to hold the April green of an unsullied tennis ball. Dear one, surely the future's not entirely out to get us, and if it is, barking won't help much. But no such luck, at least not yet. He takes umbrage this morning at a stone image serene in a neighbor's garden and stiffens and fixes and sounds his wild alarm. Damn you, Buddha, get out of here. Go away. So, not so long ago, I came to one of those birthdays that ends in 0. And so I mostly celebrate these things. Turning 40 meant feeling more myself, more I knew what I liked in my life. I knew I wanted to be 50. I felt more authoritative still. And then came the next one, and I know better than to believe what the culture tells us about turning 60. Many of the most vital, sexy, interesting people I know are in their 60s or 70s, and yet, all my life I've been told 60, it's over. Now pushed aside somehow. So I spent my 60th birthday in bed. And then, this is what happened after. Called 60. And we just want you to visualize fire lanterns, or sometimes they're called sky lanterns. They're these balloons made of rice paper. You light a wick underneath, and the heat makes the thing go sailing up. Elizabeth Bishop, in her poem The Armadillo, calls them frail, illegal fire balloons. 60. Dangerous invitations, packed flat. 6 sky lanterns for my birthday. Rice paper sack, glued at the seams. Thin bamboo ring at bottom for a mouth. A wire armature holding a deck of cards, stack of paper, soaked in wax. Frail, illegal, we know. But this birthday ends in 0. A turn I'm not so inclined to celebrate. And who could resist a lantern lifted by its own flame, sailing out over an August night's black bay? At Land's End, no other car in sight, only the deep, unfractioned evening, overcast bent down toward a horizon it erased. And here, in our flashlight circle, a bit of pavement, a blonde grass edge of dune, and just in case, a fire extinguisher. We huddle around the first, one for each decade past, one for the ones to come. I want to unfold the paper shell, steady the base, hold the opening level, touch a lighter to the wick, and feel in our 4 hands the thing swell, tugging upward, a bucking saffron lung. We couldn't hold back a moment longer. Who knew, till that first one rose, how lovely this token would be, lit from within, ghosting its arcs from side to side, hurrying into the smallest point it could become before it disappeared. And there were still 5 more to come, restless in our hands. My life wanted to be born another time as was, to turn upward and become animal winking fire, and make in air the shape it would make. This, and no other. Write the night enormous. Is that what souls are for? Drunk on my birthday wine, and maybe having smoked a little too, you'd miscounted, and hadn't brought one more for the years ahead. Thank you, love, for that. You'd meant to, but some guiding instinct, wisdom, stayed your hand and left the last lantern folded and waiting on a shelf, the better part of your gift. You met George. No one introduced you to my other dog. His name is Ned. He's a golden retriever, a fine specimen of his sort. This is one of this book. It's called Deep Lane, a recent book, and there are, I think, 7 poems in the book with the same title. Deep Lane. June 23rd, evening of the first fireflies. We're walking in the cemetery down the road, and I look up from my distracted study of whatever, an unfocused gaze somewhere a few feet in front of my shoes, and see that Ned has run on ahead, with the champagne plume of his tail held especially high, his head erect, which is often a sign that he has something he believes he is not allowed to have. And in the gathering twilight, what is it that is gathered? Who is doing the harvesting? I can make out that the long horizontal between his lovely jaws is one of the 4 stakes planted on the slope to indicate where the backhoe will dig a new grave. Of course, my impulse is to run after him, to replace the marker, out of respect for the rule that we won't desecrate the tombs, or at least for those who knew the woman whose name inks a placard in the rectangle claimed by the 4 poles of vanishing, 3 poles now, and how it's within their recollection, their gathering, she'll live. Evening of memory, spark lamps in the grass. I stand and watch him go in his wild figure 8s. I say, you run, darling, you tear up that hill. I read that poem earlier, it was last year, a very fancy reading. It was for the Royal Society of Literature in London. And the young women who work for the Royal Society of Literature often have hard days in the office, now when somebody gives them a hard time, they say, you run, darling, tear me up. So, one of the things that here in that poem is a kind of negotiation with the problem of limit going on. We all face the prospects, sooner or later, of our own mortality. How are we to proceed in this life, if we know that we have a limit, those we love will disappear. So it's something I've been wrestling with. I will always be wrestling with. It goes way back in my work, and I want to read you a poem that comes from the very early years of the AIDS epidemic. My first friend to be represented in the Names Project quilt, you know, the big, beautiful, stitched-together assemblage of memorial panels for the dead, was a man named Peter Holla. And Peter loved everything to do with the royal family. So when he died, his friends made a panel, had a big crown on it, and it said, Peter Regina across the top. And when I saw that, I was, whoa, what a shocking thing to see somebody that you knew appear in such a context. This poem remembers something of him. It's called Tiara. Peter died in a paper tiara cut from a book of princess paper dolls. He loved royalty, sashes, and jewels. I don't know, he said when he woke in the hospice. I was watching the Betty Davis Film Festival on Channel 57, and then at the wake, the tension broke, and someone guessed the casket closed because he was in there in a big wig and heels. And someone said, you know he's always late. He's still fixing his makeup. And someone said he asked for it. Asked for it. When all he did was go down into the salt tide of wanting as much as he wanted, giving himself over so drunk or stoned it almost didn't matter who, though they were beautiful, stampeding into him in the simple, ravishing music of their hurry. I think heaven is perfect stasis, poised over the realms of desire, where dreaming and waking men lie on the grass, while wet horses roam among them, huge fragments of the music we die into in the body's paradise. Sometimes we wake not knowing how we came to lie here, or who has crowned us with these temporary precious stones. And given the world's perfectly turned shoulders, the deep hollows blue by longing, given the irreplaceable silk of horses ricketing in orchards, fruit thundering and chiming down, given the ordinary marvels of form and gravity, what could he do? What could any of us ever do but ask for it? So that poem was written, I believe, in 1984, I think, a long time ago, when the AIDS epidemic was making its first inroads into my community, into my life. Some years later, my partner of 11 years, whose name was Bob Roberts, would die of complications of AIDS in January of 1992. That experience shaped my life and my work like nothing else has. And I'm going to read you two sections from a longer poem called Atlantis, the beginning and the end of that poem. And wouldn't you know, I have to apologize, there are canines in both of them. I can't help it. Atlantis 1, Faith. I've been having these awful dreams, each a little different, though the core is the same. We're walking in a field, Wally and Arden and I, a stretch of grass with a highway running beside it, or a path in the woods that opens onto a road. Everything's fine. Then the dog sprints ahead of us, excited. We're calling, but he's racing down a scent and doesn't hear us, and that's when he goes onto the highway. I don't want to describe it. Sometimes it's brutal and over, and others he's struck and takes off, so we don't know where he is or how bad. This wakes me every night now, and I stay awake. I'm afraid if I sleep, I'll go back into the dream. It's been 6 months, almost exactly, since the doctor wrote not even a real word, but an acronym, a vacant 4-letter cipher that draws meanings into itself, reconstitutes the world. We tried to say it was just a word. We tried to admit it had power, and thus to nullify it by means of our acknowledgement. I know the current wisdom, bright hope, power of wishing you're well. He's just so tired, though nothing shows in any tests. Nothing, the doctor says, detectable. The doctor doesn't hear what I do. That trickling, steadily rising nothing that makes him sleep all day, vanish into fevers, transient afternoons. And I swear sometimes when I put my head to his chest, I can hear the virus humming like a refrigerator. Which is what makes me think you can take your positive attitude and go straight to hell. We don't have a future. We have a dog. Soul without speech. Sheer, tireless faith. He is that which goes forward. Black muzzle, black paws, scouting what's ahead. He is where we'll be hit first. He's the part of us that's going to get it. I'm hardly awake, on our morning walk, which is always just me and Arden now. And sometimes I'm still in the thrall of the dream, which is why when he took a step onto Commercial Street, before I looked both ways, I screamed his name and grabbed his collar. And there I was on the sidewalk, both arms around his neck, and nothing coming. And when I looked into that bewildered face, I realized I didn't know what it was I was shouting at. I didn't know who I was trying to protect. This last section of the poem is called New Dog. Jimmy and Tony can't keep Dino, their Cocker Spaniel. Tony's too sick. The daily walks, more pressure than pleasure, one more obligation that can't be met. And though we already have a dog, Wally wants to adopt, wants something small and golden to sleep next to him and lick his face. He's paralyzed now from the waist down. Whatever's ruining him, moving upward. We don't know how much longer he'll be able to have a dog. How many men want another attachment just as they're leaving the world? Wally sits up nights and says, I'd like some lizards, a talking bird, some fish, a little rat. So after I drive to Jimmy and Tony's in the village, and they meet me at the door and say, we can't go through with it. We can't give up our dog. I drive to the shelter just to look. And there is Bo. Bounding and practically boundless, one brass concatenation of tongue and tail, unmediated energy, too big, wild, perfect. He not only licks Wally's face, but bathes every irreplaceable inch of his head. And though Wally can no longer feed himself, he can lift his hand and bring it to rest on the rough gilled flanks when they are for a moment still. I have never seen a touch so deliberate. It isn't about grasping. The hand itself seems almost blurred now, softened, though tentative only because so much will must be summoned, such attention brought to the work, which is all he is now, this gesture toward the restless splendor, the unruly, the golden, the animal, the new. Lori and I were talking about Key West today. I spent a number of Januaries there, going down to teach. It's a place of great, if you're from anywhere it's cold, Key West is thrilling. There's so many leaves and colors and birds and so much life there. So this is a little Key West poem, which is not this book. Oh, okay. It's going to take you just going. All this thing up. The other books are on here. I hope I can get to it. Okay, so where are you? Where are you? You're not going to get to hear Key West Valentine because it's not true. So let's go to Key West another way. Let's go to let's do it through. I'll tell you what. This is a poem about finding, also a poem about mortality in its way, but about finding a beautiful blue crab shell on the beach. Green crab shell. Not exactly green. Closer to bronze, preserved in kind brine. Something retrieved from a Greco-Roman wreck, patinated and oddly muscular. We cannot know what his fantastic legs were like, though evidence suggests 8 complexly folded, scuttling works of armament, crowned by the four-claws gesture of menace and power. A gull's gobbled the center, leaving this chamber, size of a demitasse, open to reveal a shocking Giotto blue. Though it smells of seaweed and ruin, this little traveling case comes with such lavish lining. Imagine breathing, surrounded by the brilliant rinse of summer's firmament. What color is the underside of skin? Not so bad to die. If we could be opened into this, if the smallest chambers of ourselves similarly revealed some sky. I have always admired the work of Jackson Pollock, those big, long, dramatic paintings. But I confess I never really got them until not so long ago when a young friend of mine, Pollock, got a job working at the Museum of Modern Art. And that meant that I could get in on Tuesdays when it was closed and be essentially alone in a room full of those paintings, which is I'm here to tell you, is a life-changing experience. There's something about these huge silent presences. So this poem centers around Pollock, and it might be useful to know that he had a studio out in the country in Long Island, where I spend a lot of time now, near a salt marsh called Accabonac Harbor, that gets in here, and he would work there, he did his best paintings there. And there's a beautiful film you can see of him painting outdoors, and the salt marsh is kind of gleaming behind him there. I think this is what I need to tell you. To Jackson Pollock. Last night, somebody murdered a young tree on 7th Avenue between 18th and 19th. Only 2 in that block. And just days ago, we'd taken refreshment in the crisp and particular shade of that young ginkgo's tight leaves, its beauty and optimism. Though I didn't think of that word until he snapped from this morning, a broken broomstick discarded, and tell me, what pleasure could you take from that? Maybe I understand it, the sudden surge of rage and the requirement of gesture. But this hour, I placed myself firmly on the side of thirst, the sapling's ambition to draw from the secret streams beneath this city to lift up our subterranean waters. Power, in a pointless scrawl now, on the pavement. Pollock, when he swung his wild arcs in the barn air by Accabonac, stripped away incident and detail till all that was left was swing and fall and return, austere rhythm, deep down things, beautiful, because he subtracted the specific stub and pith, the wreck on the too hot pavement, where scavengers spread their secondhand books in the scalding sunlight. Or maybe he didn't. Erase it, I mean. Look into the fierce ellipse of his preserved gesture, and hasn't he swept up every bit, all the busted and incomplete, half-finished and lost? Alone in the grand rooms of last century's heroic painters, granted entrance on an off day to a museum with nobody, thank you, this once, nobody talking. For the first time, I understood his huge canvases were prayers, no matter what, and silent as hell. He rode the huge engine of his attention towards silence, and silence emanated from them, and they would not take no for an answer, though there is no other. Forget supplication, beseechment, praise. Look down into it, the smash-up swirl, oil and pigment and tree shatter, tumult in equilibrium. I think if you were the Buddha and you were standing far, far from Earth, that's what you would see if you looked at our tumult and our unchanging nature. Like most of us, I think, I have been profoundly shaken by the evidence of racially motivated violence in this country in the last few years, committed by law enforcement officers, are people who at our employ. One of these stories, which perhaps this has always been happening to the same degree, perhaps there's more of it, certainly because of the ubiquitousness of the cell phone, now it's available, now we can document what's happening out there, see it, and therefore have the responsibility to respond. This poem remembers, or thinks about at least, the death of a young man named Tamir Rice. He was 12 years old. He was shot in Cleveland, Ohio in November of 2014. He was murdered by the police because he was playing with a plastic gun, which they took for real. The poem is called In 2 Seconds. That is not the right draft, so let's get absolutely the right draft. To excuse my technological limitations. Here we go. Poet's nightmares. I need a long draft of your poem. This is mine, it's really bad. Or did you see it coming? So I'm going to read you that draft. In 2 seconds. Tamir Rice, 2012 to 2014. 2002 to 2014. In 2 seconds, the boy's face climbed back down the 12-year tunnel of its becoming. A charcoal sunflower, swallowing itself. Who has eyes to see, or ears to hear? If you could see what happens fastest, unmaking the human irreplaceable, a star falling into complete gravitational darkness from all points of itself, all this, the held, loved body, into which entered milk and music, honeying the cells of him, who sang to him, stroked the nap of the scalp, kissed the flesh knot after the cord completed its work of fueling into him the long history of those whose suffering was made more bearable by the as yet unknown of him, playing alone in some unthinkable future city, Cleveland, whatever that might be. 2 seconds to elapse, the arc of joy in the conception bed, the labor of hands repeated until the hands no longer required attention, so that as the woman folded, her hopes for him sank into the fabric of his shirts and underpants. Down they go, swirling down into the maw of a greater dark. Treasure box, comic books, pocket knife, bell from a lost cat's collar. Why even begin to enumerate them when behind every tributary poured into him comes rushing backward all he hasn't been yet? Everything that boy could have thought or made, sung or theorized, built on the quavering but continuous structure that had preceded him, sank into an absence in the shape of a boy playing with a plastic gun in a city park in Ohio in the middle of the afternoon. When I say 2 seconds, I don't mean the time it took him to die. I mean the lapse between the instant the cruiser braked to a halt on the grass, between that moment and the one in which the officer fired his weapon, the 2 seconds taken to assess the situation. And though I believe it is part of the work of art to try on at least the moment and skin of another, for this hour I respectfully decline. I refuse it. May that officer be visited every night of his life by an enormity collapsing in front of him into an incomprehensible gloom, and the voice that howls out of it. If this is no poem, then, but that voice, erased boy, beloved of time, who did nothing to no one and became nothing because of it, I know that voice is one of the things we call poetry. It isn't to his killer he's speaking. I'm going to leave it there, so I'm going to end with just something short. Some years ago, I was in a very bad mood about the state of poetry. You know, all the poets I know obsess about whether or not to put a comma in the last line of stanza 3, you know, as if there were an eager public awaiting news of that decision. I can't help myself. So what is this for? Why are you doing this? And it was very bad. I went to an event at a bookstore in Houston, Texas. It was a favorite poem night. And people were, not poets, ordinary citizens, who were coming in and reading or reciting poems they loved. And this is what happened there. It's called Apparition, favorite poem. The old words are dying. Everyone forgets them. Pages falling into sleep and dust, dust and sleep, burning so slowly you wouldn't even know there's a fire. Or that's what I think half the time. Then, in the bookstore, a young man reciting, slight for 14, blonde, without irony, but not self-important either. His loping East Texas vowels threaten to escape the fence of pentameter. His voice seems to have just arrived here, but the old cadence inhabits anyway. He makes the poem his own, even as he becomes a vessel for its reluctance to disappear. All right, maybe they perish, but the boy has the look of someone repeating a crucial instruction that must be delivered, word for word, as he has learned it. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look at my works, ye mighty, and despair. So we just go right to you. What do you want to say to you?
Yep. want to take a few questions?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Okay. Some of you we had a wonderful session at Central where we got to talk with Mark, and we don't want to keep him too long tonight because we want to go up and have the reception so everyone can get home before midnight. But I think he would be glad to answer a few questions about his work.
Yeah. Maybe I'll start out by telling you in that last poem, there's a finish to that story. I was so moved by this young man reciting Shelley that I went and wrote a poem about it. The poem was published in an anthology. I went back to the bookstore and read the poem in the anthology. He was in the audience. And his daddy was so proud of it, his girlfriend was so proud of it. And it felt to me that Shelley had sent a little signal to me through him, and I got to then send something to the boy. And maybe Shelley, wherever he is, may have felt that too. Something about that circling, the life of poetry goes on, that we pass it on to each other, and something of a very old fire is preserved and continued. Poetry continues like all of us because somebody loves it. Not just your own poetry, but poetry itself passes it on to the world, passes it on to younger readers. So it's a good work. So I'd be happy to answer your questions or talk about whatever would be of interest to you. I've done my job, I think, to spell. Yeah.
How did you first get attracted to poetry?
Oh, I was in high school. I was kind of a misfit because I was an Army kid. We moved all the time. I was a queer kid. I was bookish, and sort of in my own internal realm. And I've stumbled across poems by several poets, little poems I love, the songs that the characters sing in Lord of the Rings, Tolkien works, William Blake, Federico Garcia Lorca. It's little groups of lines that somehow, you could, what they meant, but somehow there was something else going on. It was a feeling of depth charge or emotional power to them that I couldn't explain. Lorca was the greatest example. His poems were full of color and gorgeous imagery. You can translate them from Spanish into English, but you can't turn them from poetry into prose. It's practically unparaphrasable. And I love that about them. I wanted to make something like that. So I was writing poems in my notebook and playing with it, reading more. And I got an assignment from my high school drama teacher, who was a hero of mine. And he asked us to memorize something we'd written and perform it for the class. So I did. And he said, well, it's supposed to be something you wrote. I said, I did. And believe it. So he took my poems to show to a poet he knew to basically catch me as a plagiarist. And the poet was interested. Who was this kid? Suburban Tucson, was writing these poems, based on Blake and Garcia Lorca. And they weren't good poems by any means, but there was something sort of precocious about the language. So I got invited to come down to the Poetry Center in University of Arizona. The poet who taught me was named Richard Shelton. He was, looked like a sort of satyr. He wore like brown leather pants and had coppery rings in his hair. He should have had horns, but didn't. And he had an office in his cottage, his adobe cottage, completely lined inside with posters, broadsides, photographs of poets, books. And he just sort of held the door open. He said, you can come here anytime you want. You can read, you can hang out. You can come to poetry readings. And this was the point in my life when it wasn't particularly safe for me at home. So the Poetry Center was a refuge. It was a wonderful place to go. And I felt like I was walking through that door and never coming back. Here I am.
Yeah. So, thanks. This was so fabulous. I asked this question as an anthropologist who studies ritual for a living, and it occurred to me that the final line of the Pollock poem is probably the best definition of ritual anyone's ever come up with, tumult in equilibrium.
Interesting, thank you.
Now I'm trying to think, how does one put that together with everything else you shared with us about poetry and the creative spark being that which is passed along, about that which is actually, like the dog, not grasped? Because we often think of ritual as that which we subordinate ourselves to something that's greater than ourselves and deny the authorship of the action. And yet at the same time it has to have that spark of energy, that tumult and equilibrium. So, which, as you suggest, comes through kind of discipline. So how does one pull all that together
Well,
the creative process?
Then there's a thesis in your question that I would love to write. And somebody should write. It's a marvelous question. There is a way in which making a poem is an act of taking those contradictions, those things that fascinate you, that stresses in your life, and giving them a pattern or shape in the poem, right? Moving through images, ideas, to for the duration of the poem, harmonize them, right? I make something whole. Somebody murders that tree, and that's an emblem of violence and waste in the world, and this artist makes something that lifts you up. Those things are both true. And the poem wants to hold both those truths together and not say it's this or that, but it's both these. This is the reality we live in. So for me, making that poem is an act of self-consolation in part. It's an act of finding meaning in the preserved ellipse, tumult in equilibrium. He's painting the world as it is, and I want my poem to make something of that. Every poem that's any good really is a way of reconciling yourself to the world as it is and finding ways to move forward and continue to live within it. Right? I guess that's how it is. Does that make sense? Thank you. And I think they have to have room for that which you can't grasp or you can't comprehend too. There is always the unknowable, and if you write a poem if you're really confident about knowing what you're saying and knowing what can be said, you probably get in trouble. You need to leave a little room for the gap, the question that you can't answer, the uncertain contingency that will always appear. Thank you. Great question. Anybody want to follow that question?
Well, maybe not. Maybe they just want to talk to you upstairs.
Okay.
So.
It's a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you for being here.
I want to, in closing, thank you for that comment about the Poetry Center as refuge. I hope you've all heard that. And I want to say it's particularly interesting that you would say that because years ago, I went to the Poetry Center at the University of Arizona with Joy Harjo and Mary Elsie Robinson. And that's when I decided I want to live in a poetry center. Now, we have one! Please share that Poetry Center, and please know that our Poetry Center is always a place of refuge for everyone. And we will hope to see you upstairs, and after that we will hope to see you in September when one of our, I believe, the writer who will kick off our poetry for the fall is Ocean Vuong. So if you don't know his work, you're missing something. Yeah, great reader too. Yes, absolutely great reader. So go upstairs, get some goodies. Mark will come up, we'll come up, and we'll have an end of the year celebration. Thanks again for all of your support.